Hey folks, it's Lou with What If Resources for Just In Case Preparedness, and today is the potentially the fourth video in this series that started out with the conversation of what's the most important thing to have in your possession in a wilderness survival situation or scenario. And we talked about that. There's actually two things. One thing is a physical item, which is a knife, and then one thing is a skill set, a knowledge and experience based skill set, and that was firecraft. Then in the second video, we talked about knives in great detail. The third video, we talked about firecraft, and we talked about some of the generics. We went over fire safety, we went over definitions, we went over some of the gear that you may choose to bring with you that can help aid in your firecraft and certainly help you establish a sustainable fire. And then today, what we're going to do is we're here in the wilderness, and we're going to practice some of those techniques that we talked about in the previous videos. We're going to utilize a variety of knives that still meet those characteristics that professionals advise that our knife has if we intentionally step into the wilderness. And in addition to that, we're going to practice some of our firecraft techniques that we talked about. Today, we're going to do three fire lays. They're the three most common fire lays. I think the first one we'll probably do is going to be the log cabin fire lay. The second fire lay that we're going to do is going to be the teepee fire lay. And then finally, on the third fire lay, I think that we'll probably do what I really refer to as the random fire lay. With each one of those fire lays, we're going to start off with all the components that professionals advise that we have with us, some gear that they advise that we bring with us in addition to our knives. And we'll utilize that in the first fire lay, and we'll use one specific knife that I brought. And then on the second fire lay, we're going to take a lot of those items away and say, okay, well, what if I didn't have all those items that professionals recommend that I bring with me? And we'll use a different knife, and we'll make that particular fire lay and hopefully create a sustainable fire. And then finally, on the third fire lay, that's probably when we'll do the random fire lay, and we'll use yet another knife. And the intent of changing knives isn't because they're specific to fire lays or they're specific to any type of gear that we may or may not have. I just want to show you that there isn't one magic knife. There's a ton of different knives out there, and as long as they possess these specific characteristics that again that professionals advise that we have, that our knife has when we take it out with us, that really any of these different fire lays can be accomplished, and any of these different techniques that we're going to show when we're using our knives can be accomplished again as long as those knives have those characteristics. So let's get started. Thanks. All right, folks, thanks for sticking around. So as we talked about in the third video where we were discussing firecraft, one of the first things that we want to do is address safety measures, right? We always want to practice good fire safety. And one of the things that we talked about was if we're going to go out to practice, okay, obviously survival situations or scenarios are a little bit different. You can't really choose a lot of your environment, a lot of your resources, a lot of the weather conditions, etc. But when we're just practicing, we definitely can make good decisions. And so the first thing we did was we went on the internet, we researched this local area to make sure that there was no fire restrictions, no fire bans. Now, with that being said, so this specific location currently has no fire bans, no restrictions whatsoever. Okay, but in some of the surrounding areas around us, I don't know, maybe a county away, just as a reference, there are some fire bans, right? So when we were planning this video, we avoided those areas and specifically chose this area because there were no fire bans. Okay, so you may find yourself in that situation where you need to do that research. You need to do that research, but you may have to adapt and modify your plan a little bit to where you plan to go to practice making fire. So with that being said, then the next step really was once we arrived, we wanted to make good common sense decisions, right? Just because there's no fire ban, if it was super windy today, we would have to abort our plans, right? We wouldn't be able to make fire. It's just too dangerous when it's super windy. The other thing is if it was super dry, we would have to maybe find a different location, find an area with some more moisture or something like that to ensure that we're being safe. Not sure if it shows up on camera. It probably looks a little bit dry on camera, but I can assure you that it's not. We've just recently had a snow that recently melted off. But in addition to that, when I very first arrived here, there was a very, very, very heavy frost. So there's a lot of moisture in the ground. There's a lot of moisture on the vegetation that is around us. So I feel very comfortable with what we're doing. In addition to that, we're not going to be building any gigantic fires today. We don't need to warm up. We don't need to dry out. Okay, this is just kind of displaying some techniques today. That's all we're doing. So we're going to build some very small fires. And, you know, in addition to that, small fires, you don't always need a big gigantic fire. If you need to warm up, okay, maybe you do. If you need to dry out, sure, maybe you do. But a lot of times if you're just cooking, or if you're boiling some water, or if you're melting some snow or ice so that you have some water to drink, you don't need a big gigantic fire. Really small fire will certainly accomplish what you're trying to do. So we're going to build some very small fires today, very manageable fires today. Now then, in addition to that, what we talked about is establishing a fire ring, right? Making a small depression in the earth and either using that earth or rocks or snow or something to create a fire ring, somewhat of a berm around that little depression. If you're in a survival situation, you may have to try to create that. You may have to use a stick or something and try to dig that depression. You may have to go around and collect some rocks and make that fire ring. Whatever you may have to do to make sure that you're safe. Last thing in the world you want to do in a survival scenario is have a wildfire or create a wildfire, right? You don't want to add to your problems. In this particular location, I actually found an existing fire ring. Now, this is a very old one. I'm going to show it to you here in just a minute. It's a very old one, but we're going to utilize it. We're gonna dress it up a little bit. We're going to improve it just a little bit so that we make sure that it really fits our needs. But I just didn't really feel like there was a reason to go create a whole new fire ring in this landscape just for practice. I'm just going to utilize something that somebody else created. It appears to be quite some time ago. But either which way, in addition to that, I did bring some water to help extinguish the fire. And we also mentioned raking up the surrounding area to make sure that there's no combustible debris that's around our fire, and to make sure that there's no tripping hazards. Okay, again, the vegetation around us right now is damp from the frost and from the previous snow that we had, so I'm not super concerned about that. And in addition to that, where this particular fire ring happens to lay, there doesn't appear to be any tripping hazards. But obviously, as we're dressing that up, we're going to take a closer look at that. We're not going to leave our fire unattended. And when we are done, we are fully going to extinguish any ashes, any embers, any debris that could still possibly be smoldering. We're going to fully extinguish that. And we're going to make sure that fire is out before we leave. Okay? So I'm going to show you that fire ring real quick, the existing one, and then I'm going to show it to you after we've improved it just a little bit. So stick around just a little bit. Thanks. I was approaching this area, noticed this ridge up here and thought this might be a good spot for us. I also noticed there was a lot of gravel up here and things like that. So not tall, combustible type of material. There's a little bit of low-lying, very sparse collection of pine needles and things like that. But as I was researching the area, I noticed this old, very old, existing fire ring. So this is what we're going to utilize. We're going to, as you can tell, it has certainly filled in since the original person created this, but you can certainly see what we were talking about with the rocks going around the outer edge. And I'm confident at some stage in the game there was probably a slight depression there. But what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and clean that up a little bit, make sure the depression is just a little bit deeper. We might even collect a few more rocks. And to be honest, again, we're creating very small fires today, so I'm probably going to bring that ring in just a little bit, make it a little bit smaller. We for today's purposes, don't need anything very large. So give me just a few minutes and get this cleaned up, and we'll get started. Okay, folks, so we got things cleared up pretty good here. Remodified this fire ring and etc. Got our dug a very slight depression. There's a lot of rock underneath the ground there, so we went ahead and dug a minor depression, cleaned everything up, brought the rocks in closer together, closed in the gaps that were in between the rocks that are creating our fire ring. And we went ahead and just kind of took our foot there and raked out some of that what could be potentially dry debris around our fire ring. Now again, this debris here today at this location, it's not dry at all, but I did want to at least show an example of what should be done, especially if you're in a survival situation. You can't control the environment, and maybe the debris around where you want to make your fire is a little bit dry. So just go ahead and rake some of that out. Go ahead and cover a handful of feet on that. I don't know, I cleared out 2 or 3 feet there, depending on how dry things are, depending on how large your fire is going to be. You might want to clear out a larger area than that. But this is basically what we're going to deal with. So we've covered our fire safety. Again, I have some water close by, so if things even begin to get out of hand, I can quickly extinguish the fire. I don't anticipate that happening at all today, but if it were to, we can address that. And again, we're not going to leave our fires unattended, especially when we leave, but we're not going to leave it unattended at all today. So, all right, folks, let's get out a little bit of gear here and see if we can't get started. Thanks. Okay, folks, so we're going to get out a little bit of gear here and show you some of the things that professionals would advise for you to have. Now, there's a lot of items that they suggest. There's sheltering items, there's navigation items, there's a lot of different items. So what we get out here, please don't think this is all inclusive. However, what we're going to get out today is just really more related to this series. It'll be some knives and firecraft type of components. Now then, please keep in the back of your mind, once again, we've said this before, none of the experts want you to only have a knife. So in this first fire, we're going to use quite a bit of this gear that I'm getting ready to show you. In the second fire, we're going to take some of that gear away to kind of show you that we can still start fires without all of the gear, just in case you find yourself without all of that gear. And then in the third fire, we're going to try to take away the vast majority of items and still try to create a fire. Now then, with that being said, let's get out some of the items that industry leaders suggest that we try to take with us, okay? Now, obviously, one of the very first things that they discuss us having is that survival knife that we talked about. And that knife would be a knife that would have all the various characteristics that we discussed in the second video, okay? But as we're doing these different fire lays, we want to show so many different examples, so many different applications of fire lays, fire starting techniques, etc. And since we're trying to implement some knife techniques as well, we're going to go ahead and try to use a variety of knives. So we're going to try to use these 3 knives in our fire builds today, in our fire lays. But in addition to that, experts also suggest that we have some type of a saw with us. And there's tons and tons of different saws out there. This particular one is a Silky Pocket Boy. I think this one might even be the 130 version. I think that's 130 millimeters. This one right here is a Baco Laplander. Okay, again, doesn't really, the brand itself isn't as important as just simply having the tool. We discussed that, right? Knives may be the most important item, but the category that knives fall in is the tool category, and experts want us to have as many tools as we can possibly have. And these are just some examples of a few of those tools. Another tool that a person might want to try to take with them, and in the bushcraft industry, it's not uncommon to see people carrying an axe or a hatchet. So you may very well find yourself with an axe or a hatchet while you're out in the wilderness, or you may have intentionally packed that, again, in your four-wheel drive, in your ATV, in your snowmobile, in your John boat, whatever the case may be. You may very well have one of these, and if you have the room to, you certainly should. You should try to have an axe. You should try to have a saw. You should definitely have a knife, right? So those are a couple of the things that they talk about in the tool category. Those are just a few of the examples. Now then, very specifically related to firecraft. If you notice, every one of these knives that I'm using as examples today have a ferrocerium rod attached to them. Okay, so that's one of the firecraft heat source products that they suggest that you have. As we've discussed in the second video, I choose to have my ferrocerium rod attached to the sheath because the sheath is going to be attached via my belt. It's going to be attached to my body, and it really is the only way to carry a fixed blade knife. So, but in addition to that, what they really want to see us carrying is just a simple Bic lighter. And in addition to that, some type of an emergency fire tinder. Now we showed this specific, there's a lot of different ones out there, but we showed this specific one in the third video. It's an accelerant impregnated piece of cotton that has been encompassed with wax. Okay, again, there's a lot of different emergency fire tenders out there. This is just the one that we're going to use today. It's nice to be able to keep it in some type of a container so it doesn't get damaged, so you don't lose it, etc., etc. And so today we're going to have this. Okay. Now then, they talk about also for us to have, and this could be related to a lot of different things. So this is going to be more of an example of a couple of the generic things that they want us to take. And some of that is cotton. Okay, 100% cotton, and that comes in a lot of different forms. It may be your t-shirt, it may be your denim jeans, whatever, but they do ask that you try to bring something in addition to that, and that could be in the form of a shemagh, which is what I prefer to carry. Hopefully I'm capturing all of this on this video here, or I'm getting all of this in frame. And then another item that you may choose to carry in addition to or instead of a shemagh, an example would be a bandana. Okay, so those are just some examples of cotton. Now then, another item that experts suggest that we have with us, and if you're going out into the wilderness, hopefully you are carrying some type of a vessel to carry water in, right? Some type of a container. But one of the containers that they suggest that we carry is some type of a canteen or a water bottle that is stainless steel and single wall. Okay, that's very important. And the reasoning is because if we do find ourselves in a survival scenario, we can place this directly into the fire, and we can boil water, we can melt snow, we can melt ice, etc. And in this case today, in these examples, I'm going to bring a water bottle. I do have a canteen that's made out of the same material, single wall stainless steel, but today I chose to bring the water bottle. When you make these types of purchases, oftentimes you have the option of purchasing a nesting cup as well. Okay, and those are really great things to go ahead and spend those extra few dollars and go ahead and get that as well, because oftentimes those are stainless steel. And what that gives you the ability to do now is you can place this directly in the fire. You can place this directly in the fire. Now you can boil additional amounts of water. You can melt additional amounts of snow. You can melt additional amounts of ice. Okay, and they nest together, so they don't weigh very much, and they certainly don't take up much room. Okay, so that is another really general kind of item that one of the additional general types of items that experts suggest that we take with us if we go out into the wilderness. Now then, for today, what we're going to do is we're only going to use one knife for each different fire lay. So let's just leave one knife out real quick. And then we're only going to use one saw, at least in our first fire lay. So I'm just going to leave out this Baco Laplander saw. We are not going to use our axe today. Let's see here. We're not going to use our bandana. I prefer to carry a shemagh. So today in our examples, we're going to use a shemagh. Okay. Again, this is our first fire lay. As we progress, we will eliminate some of these items. We'll take some of these away from being an option for us to have. And then we'll continue to practice a variety of fire lays. So that's what we've got today. This is what we're going to use for our first fire lay. Our first fire lay is going to be Let's do the log cabin style fire lay first. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, folks, so in our first hypothetical situation here, a wilderness survival scenario, what we're going to do is we're going to pretend like it's raining or snowing. We just have large volumes of water coming down. So with that being said, what we don't want to do is try to gather any of our materials for our firecraft straight off the ground. It's going to be soaking wet, right? So we talked about that a little bit in the third video, is about trying to come up with and collect wood from dead standing trees. They're less likely to have moisture that has seeped into the vertical components of that particular tree. Now then, with that being said, we're in a very healthy forest here, so finding dead standing is somewhat of a challenge, but lo and behold, right here, I just found an example of dead standing. Now, with that being said, depending on what time of the year you're in the woods or in the wilderness, you may very well come across trees that look very similar to this, but they may just simply be trees that have lost their leaves. And I'm going to swing around here really slowly for an example of some trees that are over here that there's a good chance that those are not dead and standing. They've just simply lost all their leaves. Okay, so that wood would probably still be green and would be less desirable for fire crafting. Okay, now we'll go down there here in just a minute. We'll see if we can't find a few sticks and twigs or things like that that we might be able to gather up. But for this example, for this particular fire lay, what we're going to do is we're going to harvest truly dead standing, and what we're going to do is we're going to use our knife, and we're going to, because it's hypothetically very wet conditions out here, what we're going to do is we're going to baton into some of that wood. We're going to demonstrate batoning with our knife and try to get to some of the inside of that wood so that we can access some of the drier components of that wood. We'll discard the outer components that are most likely wet, but we'll access the inner components that are most likely dry. So let me try to get this camera set up here and see if we can't harvest some of this wood here real fast. Okay, folks, so again, experts have advised us to bring X amount of additional pieces of gear, especially in the tool category. So we've elected to, in this first fire lay, we've elected to go ahead and bring our Baco Laplander. So in order for me to down this size of tree, it's a little bit too large for me to just, potentially even dangerous for me to just sit here and try to shake it and break it and knock it down and etc. But if I did take professionals' advice and I did still have access to my gear, and I haven't lost my gear for some reason, having this saw will hugely contribute toward the success of safely harvesting this resource here, this dry material that again may be wet on the outside, but hopefully we can baton it down and find some dry wood on the inside. So stick around just a minute. Now, one thing I want to mention, you saw me just pull down a handful of branches and limbs and things like that. Just because I threw those on the ground does not mean that we're not going to take those and try to use those, okay? If this was our first fire, we would be using those right away, okay? But because today we're going to do 3 different fire examples, I'm not going to be using this material in the very first fire, but I do want you to take a mental note that we did break off limbs and twigs, and we're going to be using those in one of our other fire lay examples. This first fire lay, though, hypothetically, it's extremely wet, so we're trying to access the material that's inside of this tree. Okay, but we are going to collect this and use this in another fire lay. Now then, get back in the frame here. Now then, hopefully you can see exactly how easy that was because I had the proper tool to be able to harvest this material. Had I not had that saw, I would have either had to jeopardize my safety by trying to rock this thing back and forth and break it off, or would have had to have gone to a more challenging technique called beaver chewing that we're going to demonstrate in the next fire lay. But I really wanted to point out, look how quick and easy that was. That's one of the reasons that experts advise that we have a folding saw with us in addition to our knife. All right, let me take this back to our fire pit here. Let's get ready to process this down into smaller, finer material. See if we can't get a fire going. Thanks. Okay, folks, so we've once again taken our saw, in this case Baco Laplander, but again, we're not brand specific here. We could use silky saws. There's a lot of different saws out there that we can use. Took our Baco Laplander, our folding saw, and processed that one tree down to more manageable size pieces. I don't know, these are probably 16 to 18 inches long, something like that. But what we want to do is now we want to at least take a few of these and begin to baton down some of the outer components that, in theory, with this scenario that we're make-believing, I guess, that it's severely damp outside. And we want to try to access some of this drier material that's on the inside to get ready to make kindling and to make fuel sticks. All right, let me readjust this camera real quick. Okay, so folks, the technique of batoning is where we start to break out our fixed blade knife that has some of those characteristics that that experts suggest that we have. Again, we have full tang because ultimately what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking our knife and we're going to be hammering down on the back of this blade. Okay, so that full tang knife is going to add to the strength of that knife. A weaker style knife may break right here on that heavy impact. The other thing that we talked about is the thickness of the steel. This one specific one, again, I'm not on the knives, I'm not even going to mention brand names, but this specific one does have the 3/16 inch steel. So we talked about that being on the thicker side of what experts suggest. And this particular blade length is 6 inches. So this is really on the maximum length that experts suggest that we have. Still have the drop point design, 90-degree spine, high carbon steel, etc., etc. But for this application, let's see if we can't do some batoning. Kind of show you what that is. I like to kind of start off towards the back end of the blade, not all the way to the back, but towards the back end of the blade. So that's what batoning looks like, is you are literally taking a baton and hammering down on the back edge of that blade and forcing the edge through that piece of wood that you're trying to process. Now, had it have been raining, these outside components here would probably be very wet. Obviously outside, the extreme outside would definitely be wet, but even that water, depending on how long it's rained, etc., which way the wind's blowing, blah, 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 that moisture could have seeped in, you know, all the way into here possibly, but can almost guarantee that the rest of this wood through here would be dry. So one of the things we're going to do now is, instead of going down the center, we're going to place our knife slightly off to the edge. We're going to baton down and see if we can't get rid of some of that outside material. And you may have to flip it over and do some on the other side as well, if a little piece of it kind of split off like that one did. That's all we're going to do, is continue to kind of twirl this piece of wood around, continuing to attempt to access some of that drier wood that's more towards the center. Okay, so all that we're really trying to attempt to do here with this beaver chewing this batoning technique. So with the exception of this one piece here, there we go, we have pretty consistently dry wood, or we would find if it was wet outside, the balance of this wood here, now that we've gotten rid of the outer components, would be extremely dry. Okay, now then, with that being said, now we have dry wood. Now what? Okay, well, something this size could easily be split in half and used as a fuel stick, right? Because we talked about fuel sticks being about the size of your thumb, about 1 inch in diameter and larger. And this is a fairly decent sized piece. But the other thing that we could do is process it down even finer, right? And try to get really small pieces so that we could create kindling. And that kindling, like we talked about, is pencil lead size thickness and all the way up to magic marker size thickness. So I think for this particular piece, I'll just go ahead and make some kindling really fast. Now notice I'm not trying to drive the edge of my knife into the dirt. Okay, I'm stopping short of that and then just prying or doing whatever I have to do. Now if a piece gets really thin like this piece is, that's okay. We're using it as kindling, so the small pieces are perfectly fine. And so you can start to get to some really small pieces here. I'm going to go ahead and save that. We're going to demonstrate another little technique here that we talked about in that third video where we talked about firecraft. And we talked about shavings of wood. And again, now this one's already probably magic marker size here, right? So we're going to save some pieces like that. But if we have a nice piece like this, we'll go ahead and shave it. Try to split it down into even a smaller component and see if we can't get some. The smaller the components are, the easier they are going to be to light. Okay. So there we go. There's some small pieces there. Here's a relatively thin piece here. Here's definitely a small piece. So we're going to save pieces like that. Here's a very thin piece, kind of long, but definitely thin. Okay, so that's a good piece there. I may go ahead and just go ahead and split that really fast and have yet even some smaller pieces. Okay, so there's some really good examples of that. Now then, I am going to go ahead and baton down some more wood. I'm going to process some more materials here, but what I wanted to do was show you that other technique for getting some good ignitable material, some good, this is almost borderline tinder, and starting to get into that component of kindling. So I'm going to, with somewhat of authority, I'm going to have a fairly extreme angle here, and I'm going to be pushing down and pushing relatively hard because I'm trying to remove some material here. That's what we would kind of be looking at. Let me grab some of this. So this is some thicker shavings that would kind of really be starting to lend towards borderline kindling size pieces here. Okay, hopefully you can see that. Hopefully that's showing up on camera. And then once I get down to where the piece of wood that I'm working with is relatively thin, then I'll flatten out the angle. Like when I initially started, I was at an extreme angle. I'm going to flatten that angle down quite a bit and very gently with minor pressure. In fact, I'm using my thumb on the back end of the spine there to help push just a little bit and create some almost paper. You know, in a perfect world, I would be able to create some paper thin shavings. And those are going to ignite relatively easily once we get an open flame source in contact with them. So obviously, one of the things that I'm hoping that you're recognizing here is that there is a substantial amount of preparation in your materials here to be able to get a successful fire on your first attempt. Now, I'm not talking the first time you go out and practice. I'm talking about in a survival situation. You want to be as efficient and as effective as possible. You don't want to be sitting there trying to 13 different times trying to start a fire. You want to try to get that fire made on the very first attempt. Okay, so what we have now is a whole variety of small shavings here that are relatively thin. So it takes a little bit of time to prepare all this material and get yourself in and that will increase your odds of getting a small flame to grow larger. And then of course, once you've accomplished that, that is when we will convert the actual flame into a sustainable fire. Once that flame is consuming fuel that is approximately 1 inch in diameter and larger, that is when we have a sustainable fire. Go ahead and baton this one down. Okay, and there we go. There's a decent enough sized fuel stick, about the size of my thumb. Here's one that's maybe a little bit larger, but that's okay. We'll use that one too. So I'll go ahead and turn off the camera. I'm going to process down a little bit more material, and then we're going to get over to our fire lay. Thanks. Okay, folks, one of the things that I like to do in an effort to get started is I like to just kind of sort out some of my materials, right? And knowing that these materials are combustible, the last thing in the world I want to do is store them right next to where I plan to start a fire. I don't want that fire to accidentally get out of control. So I'm going to take some of these larger pieces here and stick those off to the side. Those fuel sticks that we talked about, I'm going to go ahead and stick some of those off to the side. And then I'm going to try to slowly but surely, gradually get to smaller and smaller pieces so that I can build my fire lay. Okay. In addition to that, one of the things that we talked about was one of the things we talked about in the third video is that after we get our very first, I mean, you do this right off the bat here. Once you get your first fire started, and especially this one, hopefully this video portrays how easy it can be if you have the materials or the gear that professionals advise that we have, how easy it can be to get a fire going. But the problem with that is that there's no guarantees that you'll have those materials or that gear available to you throughout the duration of your survival scenario, right? You may, in this case, we're going to have a lighter. In this case, we're going to have some emergency fire tinder, etc. But there's a chance maybe we lose our lighter. Maybe we consume all of our fire tinder or our emergency fire tinder. So therefore, we need to have a mentality of how am I going to start my next fires? What am I going to do to ensure that if something happens to my primary resource, that I still have additional resources to continue to make fire in the future? Again, fire being so incredibly important that we constantly have to be thinking about that. So with that being said, what we've already discussed in that third video, what we've already discussed is how important it is after we get that first sustainable fire established. One of the first things we want to do is secure our items, right? Make sure we secure our knife. Make sure if we used our ferrocerium rod, make sure we secure our ferrocerium rod, our ferro rod. But the very next thing that we would want to do is try to char some type of material, because once we have char, that opens up a variety of opportunities for us to start follow-up fires. So therefore, one thing before I ever even get this fire going, one of the things that I want to get in the habit of doing is preparing materials to make char. Now then, again, with today's first fire, what we're going to do is we're going to demonstrate having the materials that professionals suggest that we have with us when we step into the wilderness. So for this first fire, what we're going to char is we're going to char 100% cotton. What we're going to do is we're going to cut up pieces of our shamog, and we're going to place them in that tin can that we were keeping our emergency fire tinder in. So let me just grab that real quick. we're just going to do a really fast demonstration of this. We're not going to get really super in depth because there's other videos out there of making char. Again, in this example, we're going to make char cloth because we have cloth. Now, if we didn't have this shemagh and we didn't have, say, a bandana or something like that, we could use, if our t-shirt was 100% cotton, you know, maybe I could cut off part of my pocket or something like that and utilize that. But if I didn't want to jeopardize my clothing, because clothing is a resource, right? If I didn't want to jeopardize my clothing and I didn't have a shemagh or a bandana or something of that nature, then I can choose to char natural materials. So the first fire, we're going to utilize materials that professionals suggest that we have. But in the second fire, we're going to try to find some natural materials and see if we can't char some of that. So first things first, let me finish kind of sorting out some of this material here really fast. And then after that, let's start to process down some of this 100% cotton. And let's start preparing our tin to make char. Give me just a moment. Okay, so for the most part, I've got a lot of this separated out here. These fire lays, they don't need to be exactly 100% perfect. Okay, we're not constructing a building or something here, an automobile or something that has virtually no tolerances whatsoever. There's some variables here. We can play around with a few things. If it's not 100% perfect, that's okay, as long as the principle is there. And the principle there is, as we discussed in the third video, the principle there is going to be that essentially the tinder is at the bottom, and then because heat rises, so does flame, and therefore our kindling, which is the next larger size piece of material, will be above that. And the intent is that the flame will make contact with the kindling, again, pencil lead size thickness, all the way up to magic marker size thickness, and then that flame then would grow and come into contact with our fuel sticks. Okay, so that's really kind of the idea there. That's the general principle of all these fire lays that we're going to demonstrate. Okay, but really quick, let me cut up some of this cotton shemagh here. And a cotton shemagh can be used for so many different things. I think we briefly talked about that at the beginning of the video, but I mean, it can be used to help filter large debris out of water. Like say you went to a creek or something like that, and you decided to try to collect some water. Well, maybe there's a lot of pine needles in that water. Maybe there's a lot of leaves in that water or something of that nature. And you can kind of use a shemagh to filter some of the large, coarse debris out of that water before you boil it. A lot of other things can be done with the cotton shemagh for sure. First aid applications, you can use a shemagh if you suffered some type of major laceration or something like that. You could tie a shemagh around there and help slow down the bleeding on that wound. You could certainly tie it around your neck and make a cradle. Essentially, you're making a sling and support your arm if your arm was broken or sprained or something like that. So just tons and tons of applications. Obviously, the initial intent of a shemagh was to be able to wrap around your neck, protect it from the sun, let's say, wrap it around your face, protect it from blowing snow or something like that. And that's really just so many different things a shemagh can be used for. And so therefore, that's one of the many reasons, or that's a few of many reasons why the professionals and industry leaders suggest that we carry a form of cotton, and that's one of many reasons of why I choose to carry a shemagh. Okay, now then, just real briefly, let's talk about this so that we don't have to talk about it again in future videos. Again, this is the tin that I'm carrying my emergency fire tinder in. Emergency fire tinder comes in a lot of different shapes and sizes and brands and etc. This is just the one that I choose to use. The tin, because this specific one screws down, okay, once I put this cotton inside, and I want it to be fairly loose. I don't want to sit there and just pack wads and wads and wads of this in there, okay? Just going to put some of it in there. And then what is essentially happening is I'm going to toss that into the fire once our fire gets going, okay? That heat from that fire is basically going to start cooking the 100% cotton. And therefore, it's going to be trying to emit some gases. And so because of that, since this particular container has a screw lid and it kind of gets really tight, I'm going to need to poke a hole in this to allow the gases to escape. Now then, some people are going to ask, well, why is that cotton not catching on fire? Okay, remember the fire triangle that we talked about in our third video. In order to have fire, we have to have fuel, which in this case is our cotton. We have to have a heat source, which in this case is going to be our fire. But in addition to that, we have to have oxygen. Okay, so by having it inside some type of a container like this, yes, we're going to poke a little hole in it to allow gases to escape. But what we're doing is we are starving this little microclimate of oxygen. And that is why it is essentially going to cook, but it's not going to ignite. Okay, and technically at the end of the day, what that is called is it is going to char. Okay, very similar to charcoal, like what you might use in your barbecue. It's going to be black. It's going to be somewhat fragile when we're done, but it's going to be a very useful item that we can use in follow-up fires. Okay, so real quick, I'm going to poke a hole in that. Now, if I was in a survival situation and this particular knife was all I had, I would use that knife to do that. But because I'm just practicing and I don't want to dull the tip of my knife, I'm just going to use my work knife here. Same one I've shown you guys in the second video. Okay. There we go. That's really all that needs to happen. Just a really, really, really tiny hole, just enough to allow gases to escape, but not so large as to allow oxygen to enter. Okay, so that's what we're doing. So now that this is prepped and ready, now what we're ready to do is go ahead and build our fire lay. And as discussed, our first fire lay is going to be a log cabin fire lay. So if you can envision a log cabin, basically, you know, there's 4 sticks or 4 logs on the bottom layer, and then the next layer looks something like that, and then the next layer looks something like that, and then the next layer looks something like, you know, like this, and it just kind of graduates up until eventually you put a roof on it. Okay, well, that's basically, I think, where the name of this fire lay came from. It's going to be a very, very similar to this type of construction. However, instead of being structurally sound and putting large things at the bottom, instead what we're going to be doing is we're going to be putting very fine things at the bottom in an effort to hope that these things will, this kindling will catch on fire and then, or ignite, it catch on fire, and then those flames will progress up through the larger material, which would be our fuel sticks. So let's get started with our log cabin fire lay. Okay, folks, so as I was trying to kind of get this all set up, I recognized the way I was initially positioned. I was casting a shadow on our fire ring. So I'm going to kind of kneel off to the side here and try to build this. I'm going to have to constantly keep reaching over to grab this material, which is unfortunate. I wish I would have realized that sooner. But basically, what I do like to do is, what you want to do is you want to keep your kindling a little ways up off the ground. What the idea being is, remember, I need to put our emergency fire tender underneath it, okay? And in addition to that, we want the oxygen to be able to get around our flame source. So therefore, I don't want to place everything just directly right on the ground. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a couple of our larger pieces of wood here. Just kind of put those down like that. And then, you know what? Actually, I'm going to reposition those this for a very specific reason. Okay, and then from there, in an ideal world, what I would be able to do is then start placing some very small, and here we go, having to lean in. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to get in on this side and maybe be able to prevent some of that shadowing. So what I would then want to do is place some of my smaller materials on top of that, because again, we're going to stick our emergency fire tender source. Once it's lit, we're going to get our emergency fire tender source basically right here, and that flame is going to rise up through this material. So what I'm going to do really fast is I'm going to put just a couple of pieces. Again, this is kind of that log style type fire lay. Okay. Again, I'm kind of repeating this, but none of this has to be just absolutely 100% perfect. Okay. We're just trying to get really close there. Now, hopefully the camera's picking this up, that I've got these spaced a little bit apart, and that's again so the flame can raise up and through, and so the oxygen can continue to circulate around. Okay, so now that I've kind of accomplished that, now just like a home would be, or a log building would be, start going back and forth in the directions of all these various materials here. So since I've got some running this way, I'm now going to get some running this way. Okay. And again, that's kindling size. It's very, very small size material. Okay. And now that I've kind of got that, those various mats, let's just call them, in place, now I can start to put some of this other really thin, really small, very airy type materials that should be easier to ignite. Again, I'm laying them all the same direction. Okay, now I'm going to go back to laying some material back the other direction, and I'm trying not to just completely flood this thing, and I'm trying not to starve it from oxygen. That is definitely not something that we're trying to accomplish here. And once again, I'm not trying to build a very, very, very large fire. That's not my plan today. That's not my intent. My intent instead is to just ensure that we can get something kind of going here. All I'm doing here is poking a couple of sticks in the ground because some of this material wants to roll off to the side. I am on a hillside here, so that makes perfect sense. Okay, now that I've got some material going that way, I'm going to get some material going this way. And again, just continuing with some of these finer pieces of materials going back and forth and back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. That's all I'm really doing. Okay, once I get this kindling going, I could then either add fuel sticks, or I can go ahead and take at least some of the smaller ones anyway, and go ahead and begin to place some of those, let's see, this direction, the opposite direction of the last mat, and try to help aid in that flame going ahead and starting to rise up through the kindling and catch some of the fuel sticks. So now that I have that, just for the heck of it, why not? I'm just going to put a couple on here, because again, I'm not trying to start a big gigantic fire here or anything like that. Just trying to, that's a little bit small for the examples that we're trying to use here, but let's just that's a little bit big. Let's go with that. There we go. Now then, obviously, I could continue to graduate to larger and larger sizes if I wanted to, but it's really not necessary in the initial lay. And the reason for that is because as the flame gets going, I can start adding more wood, especially larger sizes of wood, more fuel size sticks. Okay. Now then, the reason I chose to put this at this angle, not preparing for the shadow, is because I recognize this one stone just for the initial insert of the fire tinder. I can move that off to the side. And then what my plan is going to be is to light that on fire, or ignite that, and then slide that up underneath there. Okay, once I've done that, I'm going to move the stone back. But for right this second, this gives me a little bit of room to be able to accomplish that. Now then, just like in our original statement on the third video with Firecraft, what we talked about is whether it's wood, whether it's tinder, whatever it is, you don't want to just take something as a whole and try to light it on fire. If I took my lighter right now and held it up to this, what I was using as a baton earlier, that's very large. That's not going to catch on fire very easy. But now that I've processed that wood down to smaller components, it should ignite easier. Okay, that same theory applies to our tinder as well. Could I throw a lighter to this and it catch on fire? Honestly, the truth of it is I probably could, but that's really not the technique that they want us to try to employ. Instead, what we want to do is we want to process this down just a little bit. We don't have to get super crazy with this, but what we want to do is try to expose some of these fibers and increase the surface area. Okay, so now that I've done that, I'm going to take my lighter that, by the way, I want you to notice I have safely secured in my pocket. I don't have this thing laying up here where it can tumble into the fire. I don't have it laying over here where I can accidentally step on it and break it, nor do I have it setting somewhere where I can accidentally misplace it, okay? Another thing that a lot of professionals suggest is that you have a high visibility lighter, at least in your emergency preparedness for a wilderness survival situation. If you want to carry another lighter for other reasons, that's certainly up to you. But for emergency preparedness, try to have something high visibility. If I were to drop this, I can easily see it, okay? It doesn't blend in. It's not brown, it's not green like a lot of my clothing is. It's not gray. Instead, it's a high visibility orange lighter, okay? And then as soon as I get done lighting it, what am I going to do? I'm going to resecure it. Okay. I've already resecured my knife, and in this case we're not using our ferrocerium rod, but if we were using our ferrocerium rod, I would resecure that. Okay. Another thing I just want to throw out there really quick before we light this, I could light that with the ferrocerium rod, okay? But again, experts suggest that we carry a Bic lighter with us, some type of emergency fire tender, and so that's what our first fire is going to be. So here we go. Hopefully you can see that, but that is already burning. That open flame only touched that for a matter of possibly 1 second. The other thing I want you to notice is, although yes, we have a very, very, very slight breeze, it is nothing major. We're not in a dangerous situation here. The other thing I want you to notice is look how high that flame is, especially compared to this lighter. Very high, very hot flame. It's going to burn for a very long time. So even if we had marginal wood, this particular product would do very well for us, okay? So here we go. We're going to go ahead and insert it. I'm going to go ahead and replace this stone just because that's the right thing to do. That's a safety precaution. And that flame is going up from that emergency fire tinder. It is now growing up through the kindling. It's now rising up through the kindling. And it is now starting to touch the fuel sticks. Okay, so therefore now those are starting to catch on fire. Now what I want you to notice is just how simple that really was, right? A quick flick of the lighter, an emergency fire tinder that took that flame right away, inserted it in because we took all the necessary steps to process our material. Okay, we didn't just try to throw big giant logs on there. We didn't light our fire tinder and then start batoning. Okay, that's not what we did. We got everything prepared ahead of time. And then, like I mentioned, we want to keep a lot of this flammable material away from our fire. Okay, now then, let's secure our lighter in our pocket. If we have a leftover piece of emergency fire tinder, of course we want to secure that as well. In this example, we had some leftover material. We've already placed our part of our cotton shemagh, our 100% cotton material, inside of this little tin that was originally housing this emergency fire tinder. We've already poked a hole in that so some of the gases can escape. Now, we don't need to throw this in right away, but there's no sense of me accidentally stepping on it or accidentally kicking it. And what if I was close to water and it flew off into the water or something like that? So because I have this opportunity, I'm going to go ahead and lay it in here. And quite frankly, that fire is going to probably burn fairly well, and it's probably going to do exactly what we need it to do for the char cloth. However, if I had any kind of doubts whatsoever, I have plenty of material here. Notice, I have plenty of material here. I don't have to go collect more material. I don't have to remove myself from this fire. I don't have to leave this fire unattended. I have everything I need right here. How long does char cloth or any material, all material takes a little bit of different time here, but char cloth itself normally takes, I don't know, it depends, 4, 5, 6, 7 minutes. It doesn't take a huge amount of time to be able to char. And I just let it sit. Some people claim you can't really over char, right? You could let it sit there for an hour or two if that's what you wanted to. It really wouldn't hurt anything. That's perfectly fine. I don't really see any reason to get in a big giant hurry. So if you want to leave it there for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever, and then eventually pull it out and check it and to make sure that it is pitch black. Okay, once this fire has kind of died down, that can has kind of cooled down a little bit, I'll pull it out and I'll check it in front of the camera here just to make sure that it did char properly. But for right this second, I don't want to add more fuel to this fire because we want to do more fire lays today. I don't want to sit here and just continue on for 45 minutes on this one fire lay. So, but that was the log cabin fire lay. As you can see, it was very effective. And we're going to see what happens next here. Let this die down a little bit, secure our emergency fire tinder, and prepare for our next fire lay, which will involve losing some of these excellent items that we had that experts suggest that we carry, and therefore we did carry. And in addition to that, we're going to get some more resources. We're not going to have any emergency fire tender, so we're going to have to get some more emergency fire tender or some more natural fire tenders and things like that. We're going to lose our saw, so we're going to have to practice another technique called beaver chewing in order to harvest and collect some of this dead standing wood. I'm also going to show you another example of dead standing that I think will come in handy for a lot of folks here. So let's go ahead and get this turned off. This fire's out. Okay, folks, so what I wanted to kind of show here is that we're going to have to stop filming for today. Conditions are not good for us to continue with what we're doing. Not conducive for fire building. So in addition to drowning the fire, I found a small patch of snow. I went ahead and threw the snow on there, made sure I didn't see any smoldering or anything of that nature. And then I went around and just with my hands, I just scooped up some dirt and gravel, made sure there was very little organic debris that could catch on fire, and went ahead and buried the inside of our fire ring. Any of our little pieces of charcoal that were left over, anything like that, are fully extinguished and fully suffocated. So that's the proper way when you are leaving from practicing making your fires, or if you're in a survival situation, that's the proper way to make sure that you have left the area in a safe manner. It's a responsible thing to do. So, all right, folks, thanks for joining. We'll try to get back and do some more recording as soon as possible.